Welcome in to the newest episode of the Hoth Hangout podcast. Going to be a fun one this evening. We're going to be covering mainly our thoughts on the sequels a few years following the fact of those coming out. It's going to be an interesting episode for sure. A couple updates in regards to the gaming universe, and then a couple Mother's Day shout outs as well. But before we get into all of that, of course, if you're not subscribed to the Hoth Hangout YouTube channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We would really appreciate it very much. And thanks as always for listening to us on all your podcast listening platforms, whether that be Apple, Spotify, whatever you may listen to your podcast. We're also now officially on Instagram. So check us out at Hoth Hangout on Instagram, in addition to over on Twitter
Finally.
and TikTok. Finally, yes. Also at Hoth Hangout on both of those platforms as well. Going to be a great one today. But before we get into all of that, Joey, what's going on, man? I see you're rocking the Ray.
Yeah.
The Ray
I think
memorabilia.
it was only appropriate that, since we're talking about the sequel trilogy, we talk about wearing the proper attire for it. So we got Rey here rocking from the Star Wars Celebration in Chicago back in 2019.
Ooh, okay.
It was a show exclusive, so I may be one of 4 people that got it. I don't know how many people got this, but but it's definitely no, I had to wear that. But no, I'm doing well. Today was my daughter's birthday. So we
Happy
went,
birthday.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, she just turned 10 today, so we hit up the museum downtown, and yeah, it was a fun day. So if you could, anybody, if you're watching on YouTube, drop a little happy birthday, Justine, in the comments, just to give her a little love too. I'd appreciate it.
There we go. Nice. Welcome to double digits, Justine.
Oh my
Happy
gosh.
birthday.
Yeah, that's you wonder why I've lost all my hair. This is I have a 10-year-old.
There you go. Well, I hope her birthday was awesome. I hope that was a fun day for all of you guys. I guess let's kick it off with a few things not related to sequels, and then we'll hop into what the bulk of this podcast will be in the world of gaming, which of course both Joey and I, that's originally, of course, how we first met. We have been doing our playthrough of Jedi Survivor, most recently at the time of the release of this podcast, roughly 36 hours before the release of this podcast. We were playing our third episode of the Jedi Survivor playthrough, the newest Survivor or the newest Star Wars game to be released. Uh, we, Joey and I, have self-dubbed ourselves the masters of the side quests.
Exactly. Yeah, if you go back and watch the VOD, you see us on I think at least 2 side quests that takes about half of the time that we are on the planet that we're still on the second planet, about 6
Hobo,
hours
right?
into the game. Yeah, still about 6 hours into the game. But I'm we I for me, because I'm playing it now, not Ben. So I definitely go look for every single little nook and cranny to find things. So this might be a little bit of longer playthrough.
I felt bad. I felt like at times I was like backseat gaming too much. I was like, oh,
No. Well, especially in the last one, we were trying to figure it out. We were there for about. I went back. I think we were there for almost an hour
yeah.
on
So
that last one.
if you didn't manage to catch our live stream, the last hour, as Joey just said, was in this one location, and it was like us trying to figure out this puzzle thing where you had to like move like a ball to get it to fit into a thing, and there was two of them, and you had to like maneuver them around in a specific way. So it took us a long time, right? Joey finally figures it out, probably 45, 50 minutes in. And the worst part of this whole thing is when we finally get to the point in the puzzle room that we were trying to get to, there's like no reward except
Yeah.
for a
Oh,
lightsaber hilt.
like yeah, right. Not even the full hilt, just like one piece of it. So,
Yeah. You're like,
um,
oh my gosh.
yes, but it was satisfying to actually finish it. So
Yeah.
no regrets. No regrets.
No regrets. Well, we're gonna be playing even more Jedi Survivor in the coming weeks. Hopefully, making it to the end of the game, kind of at a little bit of a slower pace, but we'll get there eventually. Don't you worry. So, if you enjoy Star Wars and if you are a fan of just video games in general, check out our live streams for Jedi Survivor. Pretty much nearly every week at this point. Typically, either on a Monday or Tuesday evening is when those become
Mhm.
available, or should be, I should say, be able to be watched live. And then, of course, moving on to another game, which I know both of us, but especially Joey, holds very near and dear to his heart, and what we've discussed on, I think, our last 2 or 3 episodes of the podcast. is Fortnite, of course, and the Darth Vader skin is now officially in Fortnite. And you can play as Darth Vader in this game now. Joey, how does it make you feel? These two worlds of yours
Well, it's
coming together.
it's actually him. You have to fight Darth Vader in this game
Wait,
now.
you don't get to play as him?
N I mean, it was in there before, but yeah, this was referring to actually the Darth
Scrap
Vader.
everything
Yeah.
I just said.
Yeah, so there's you have to actually fight Darth Vader in the game as part of the quests, that we've kind of mentioned in the past.
Right.
The skin that we're trying to get is the Darth Maul skin, and, we are now in the last phase of that Darth Maul pass, which is live for the next 6 days. And one of the things that you do have to do is defeat Darth Vader, like, on the Fortnite island with all the stormtroopers, surrounding him, so it's interesting. But yes, I don't think now that I think back, yeah, I don't think the Vader skin is actually available for you to purchase.
Oh.
But I think it was maybe a year ago, but yeah, for some reason it has not come
So
back
this skin
as a
was in the game
purchasable.
prior to this point, but it's just that
Yes.
he is like the final boss in order to get the Darth Maul skin.
Yeah, one of the challenge tasks is to defeat Darth Vader in there. So,
Gotcha.
which is fun because kind of like what you mentioned last week, it's fun to have to play as certain characters in Star Wars. It's even more fun when you're actually playing against them as well. So I think it's funny trying to snipe Darth Vader from 400 meters away while he's throwing lightsabers around. So, but yeah, it is the final phase of the Darth Maul pass in the next 6 days. If you don't get in on it now, then you'll miss it out for this round.
Y'all got until May 23rd to get you that Darth Maul skin. For those of you watching the video version of the podcast, check out that awesome looking skin. It actually looks like it's straight from the movie. It's cool how accurate
Yeah,
they can make
yeah.
it look in the game. But
I'm about 2 challenge tasks away from unlooking him, so
ooh, I
I'll
gotta
be there
catch up.
very soon. Yeah.
I know I'm more than 2 challenge tasks away. Well, I'll get it. I'll have to
Yeah,
grind a
okay,
little bit
yeah.
of Fortnite in the next week. I'll get there, don't you worry. And then kind of moving on from the world of gaming, in which we are both such big fans of. Of course, we want to wish a slightly belated, but nonetheless very, very happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there in the world. And we also want to give a special shout out to some of the mothers within Star Wars. Joey and I both kind of picked one to focus on, but also worth mentioning, there's some great mothers in the world of Star Wars. A few of them that came to mind for the both of us when we were going over this list of mothers was actually one that came to mind at the end was Aunt Beru, which she's like sh- she plays a mother role to Luke. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I think so.
Padme, of course. How could we forget Padme? Shmi Skywalker, kind of this source of anger for Anakin eventually. And, oh, there they are. We love the mothers of Star Wars right there. That's a good look. That's a good picture.
Yeah.
Producer Gibbo coming in with the nice pictures there.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe we don't see too much of, Padme obviously as a mother, but, she obviously was the mom of both Luke and Leia, and how important she was to the entire universe of Star Wars. Like you said, as Shmi and Aunt Beru, obviously very important, not only to their families but also to the universe of Star Wars. So we thank them, and we think it's great to have these moms be represented here, and I'm sure we missed a ton as well, but me and Ben actually picked some of our favorite, one of our favorite moms of Star Wars. So Ben, you want to go first and what you
Yeah,
picked?
definitely. So when we were talking about this, I was trying to think I asked Joey actually right before the podcast, and I think I asked you when we were planning the notes for this podcast too, if I should pick based on, like, their example of motherhood or just, like, how much I like them as a character, but it's kind of like a mix of the 2 in a way, but
Mm-hmm.
I guess for me, my pick was Hera only because I love her as a character, even though we don't really get to see her as a mother per se, but in a way, which Joey was good to remind me of, she is sort of a mother of the crew as a whole
Mm-hmm.
in Rebels. For those of you that maybe are movie only Star Wars watchers and you haven't seen Rebels, first of all, I highly encourage you to watch the show because it's really incredible. And second of all, Hera is the sort of female lead of this show, more or less. I guess you could argue Sabine kind of is too, but um, she is the mother role of this crew of Ezra, Sabine, Kanan, and Zeb, who, by the way, we got to see in live action for the
That's
first time
right, yeah.
recently, which was pretty cool. Um, but then, of course, she is also a mother to Jason Sindula, who I think I had to be reminded of this when we were talking about it.
Yes, you
But
did.
the very last episode of Rebels, you see her with Jason, who, of course, uh, I guess spoiler alert, close your ears if you wanna watch Rebels and still for some reason haven't seen it. But, Kanan and
Yes.
Hera have a child. Unfortunately, Kanan does not make it to this point in the show, but, um, their child, Jason Syndulla, Jacen, which is actually a tribute to, um Han and Leia's child in Star Wars Legends, the name of him,
Oh.
who was Jason Solo. And then, of course, Jason Solo is also kind of the prototypical character for the forming of Kylo Ren or Ben Solo, as we see in the
Gotcha.
sequels, which we'll be talking about today. So it all kind of ties in
Yeah, yeah.
together there. But
Oh, perfect.
Harrison Dula is probably, I think, just if I was making a list of favorite character, not just female characters, but characters in general in Star
Mhm.
Wars. I mean, I would still go Ahsoka, number 1, but just characters in general in Star Wars, Hera is definitely in my top 10. I don't know if I'd put her in my top 5, but all that to say, she is, like, one of my favorite characters in
Yeah.
Star Wars, and
And who will we will be able to see in live action very soon in Ahsoka, so,
yes,
yeah,
along with
so
Sabine and,
yeah.
Ezra as well.
Who knows, maybe Jason Syndulla appears in there too, who knows? We may see
Yeah,
Hera there as well, so
yeah,
we're
I wouldn't
excited.
be shocked. What about
That would
you?
be very cool.
Who's your favorite
I
mother
gotta
of
go
Star Wars?
with the fan
The one
favorite Leia,
the one we haven't named yet?
the fan favorite Leia Organa. Um, I mean, in every movie, she's been so iconic. Just in the way that she presents herself. I mean, she ends up being a general at the end. Um, we find that she is she is, of course, force sensitive. As being the twin of Luke's, they did some Jedi training together. Ben Solo is her son. And even through it all, I mean, you still saw the connection, and we'll even talk a little bit about it today. The connection between her and Ben, even throughout the sequel trilogies, even though they were on such separate sides of the world as far as the Force, she was still able to hold on to a piece of him that maybe nobody else could. So I think, Happy Mother's Day to her and to everyone. But yeah, she's my favorite mom inside of the Star Wars universe.
It's pretty tough to beat Princess
Yeah,
Leia in terms of,
yeah.
characters in Star Wars.
I wanted to call her first, when I wanted dibs on her when we were talking about, favorite mothers, so, I made sure to do that real quick.
You know, unintentionally, we kind of picked the same, the children of our picks for favorite mother are basically the same person if you think about it.
Oh,
They're
yeah, yeah, yeah.
they're both based off the same character in one way or another.
Look at that.
Yeah, so
Legends. Thank you.
legends, yeah. Does that mean we're, what's the opposite of retconning? Like, reinstituting? Are we
Yeah, right, yeah.
reinstituting legends?
Reiterating, yeah.
Yeah. But again, wanna wish a very happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. We, appreciate you, and we hope you had a wonderful day getting to, maybe celebrate with family a little bit as well. So, happy Mother's Day to everyone out there too. The final thing we wanted to touch on very briefly before we hop into the sequel trilogy discussion, guess who had a birthday this week, Joey? None other than Papa George himself. He had a birthday on May 14th, and, this man, the genius mind, of course, behind the world that we all love,
Mhm,
very near and dear to our hearts in a galaxy far, far away.
mhm.
This dude is 79. I told you right
That's
before we
yeah.
started recording, I thought he was, like, not even 70. He looks
Yeah.
good for 79.
Well, money will do that to you, I think, so,
Yeah. He's got
yeah.
that Disney money now.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think he's set. He's I mean, I think he still dresses like a dad with the jeans and the flannels and all that,
Yeah, George
which
Lucas is
I
big bad vibes.
appreciate being a dad myself.
There you
I
go.
feel like if I got that Disney money, I would do the same. I would still have the Skechers and the and the belt clip from a phone, so he's got those dad vibes. But yes, George, thank you for Star Wars. Happy birthday, sir. And if you want to subscribe to our podcast, you know where to do it.
Yep. We have it on good word that George is, maybe a listener of the Hoth Hangout
Oh,
podcast.
perfect.
Yeah. Um, by the way, what do you think is a bigger dad vibe, Skechers or those white New Balance with the blue, like
Oh, probably that one. Yeah, then the New
yeah,
Balance, yeah. With the
I
with
think
the blue N on them.
yeah, I think George probably rocks those.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, happy birthday to George. Happy 79th birthday to George
Wow.
Lucas. Hope he is doing well, enjoying retirement, but also we miss you.
Speaking of which.
Yeah, speaking of which, perfect opportunity to transition into talking about the, only trilogy of the Skywalker saga that was not headed by George Lucas, the sequel trilogy. I think just to kind of kick off our conversation, because this is gonna be the bulk of this episode, I just wanna say that I think there's kind of, not from everyone, but kind of this general negative stigma or feeling around the sequels. And I think what Joey and I are really hoping to do with this episode, um, is not really like reaffirm those stigmas and stereotypes. Like we still might have obviously parts of the movies that we find, less than appealing or whatever, but I think it's more so to readdress the films years later and kind of touch on things that we might have forgotten about, or things that they did well that maybe people gloss over, and they only look at maybe the negative things. I mean, we'll talk about the good and the bad, of course, but we kind of wanted to go into this with an open mind. We each watched each of the three sequel trilogy films from beginning to end in order to sort of prep for this podcast. And I really Joey, tell me how your watch throughs went. I went into it kind of thinking, okay, I want to have as little biases as I can going into this, and I tried to watch each one with a really open mind. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember the last time I watched all 3 consecutively in a row, if I'm gonna
I
be
don't.
honest with
I
you.
had never done that. I'd only
Yeah,
seen 8
so
and 9 one time before my
so that
rewatch.
so probably for you, just like we've talked about with shows, it could be a different experience if you do it that way in comparison to having to wait week by week,
Mhm.
when a show releases. I mean, this is a perfect opportunity to kind of, quote unquote binge watch these movies straight through. So that was kind of my mentality going into it. Like maybe I'm gonna see things a little bit differently, either from bad or good. I don't know. But yeah, so I was actually pretty excited to get into these.
Yeah, like I said, approaching it with an open mind. I wanted to give him a fair shot, and I think
Hmm.
that's what I did. And I think
Yeah.
I came away with things from each film that I was surprised by,
Hmm.
completely and honestly.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess
Yeah.
before we hop into the specifics of that, uh, kind of the other general sentiment that surrounds these films is, I guess, what I would call the asynchronization of the plot that runs between the films, especially. Or like the strings that tie the films together. And for those that obviously, watched these films when they came out, or have gone back and looked at the development process, of Disney making these films, is that each one was directed by, initially was supposed to be directed, I think, by JJ was supposed to do all three, and like before seven ever came out.
Mm.
And then Ryan Johnson signed on to do episode 8. Which, by the way, I'm a huge Ryan Johnson fan. He's actually one of my favorite directors.
Knives Out.
Um, Knives Out, fantastic movie. Yeah. And then what Trevorrow was
Colin Trevorrow.
was originally signed on to do episode 9, dropped out relatively late in the process. And of course, as we know now, JJ Abrams, the same director who did episode 7, came on to do episode 9 as well, which in turn made for, I guess, I don't know if I want to resort to using the adjective sloppy storytelling,
Mhm.
but films that did not, because I don't think the movies themselves, for the most part, are sloppy storytelling. we'll get into some details there more a little bit later. But, if you were to look at each film as like a ball on a string, right? The strings between each ball
Mhm.
just is like twisted and knotted. Maybe there's like some, dirt on those strings. I don't know if you're I don't even know if this analogy is making any sense or not. But what I'm trying to say is
Well, some of the strings are frayed. Like, you're this
yes,
is kinda what you're
yes.
saying. Yeah, yeah. It's
Like
not clean. It's not a
it's
clean
not
it's not
clean.
clean. It's not clean.
And having different directors for films that are supposed to form a trilogy just creates like an
Yeah.
entirely different vibe between each movie. And sometimes it's not necessarily a bad thing. There's certain things about each film and the style that I
Yeah.
like. Um, and then there's certain things about each style and each film where I'm like, I didn't love that.
Yeah.
So just as sort of a preface to our discussions and our conversations regarding these films, uh,
Yeah.
that is always that underlying component in that I think when these films came out, there was a perceived animosity between J.J. Abrams and Ryan Johnson, and I don't
Mm.
even know if that was the case or not, but
Mhm.
I think a lot of that came from the fact that, for example, J.J. would institute something in episode 7, right? For the record, I liked what J.J. did for the most part in episode 7, and then Ryan would institute something in episode 8 that kind of built off what J.J. did, but really switched things up in some way,
Mhm.
and then having the same director from 7, direct 9, there was a few things that were almost, like, undone
Yeah.
that Ryan did to undo what JJ did, so it was almost like a, "Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
it my way again, buddy," you know what I
Yeah, right, right. Exactly.
so, I don't know. That is worth
That's where
noting.
yeah, that that is what we had to work with going
Yes.
into the sequel trilogy.
Yes. Did you I just rambled for a long time. Do you have any thoughts overall before we hop into talking about The Force Awakens?
No, I think, we can get started right into Force Awakens.
Okay. Uh, this one Force Awakens. This was released, December 18th of 2015. Hard to believe that we're, gosh, almost 8 years removed from this film.
Mm.
And that's also worth noting too. This film, the first scene where Kylo, like, catches the blaster midair, like, that's awesome that
Yeah.
that was something they could do,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know? Um, I when I was taking notes on this film, the very first thing I wrote to that regard is that visually, I think these 3 films are the best Star Wars has ever looked.
Yes.
Um, and, they're motion picture films that have a ton of money pumped into the CGI department and whatnot,
Yeah,
but
and when was the last Star Wars film? I mean, or
true, yeah.
Skywalker saga film.
Yeah, not to, I guess, jump ahead too much, but that's something I noticed in episode 9 with the way the lightning looks,
Mm, mhm,
when Palpatine's shooting the lightning.
mhm.
Compared to what it looks like when he's shooting the lightning in Revenge of the Sith, which
Oh,
came
yeah,
out
yeah.
in 2005, like, in '05, it's like, the purple streaks coming from his fingers,
Yeah, right.
but then in 2019, when Rise of Skywalker came out, it's just like these blasts of lightning, like,
Yeah,
going
yeah,
into the
right, yeah.
sky, you're like, "Oh my gosh."
Right.
Anyways, um, so not I think we're gonna do with our kinda overview of these, I'm gonna try not to go into too much depth on story details because I
Mm.
think I have a tendency to do that sometimes.
What?
Um,
Can we, cue anytime Ben has talked about anything right here?
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Um, I will say a couple of the notes I made on Force Awakens, I enjoyed the process of getting to experience something from a stormtrooper's perspective. This was Force Awakens was the only one of the sequel trilogies that I had seen multiple times prior to my rewatch. So kinda starting off with Finn, I was trying to watch it from the perspective as well of someone who almost had never seen it. So I was like,
Mhm.
"Oh, yeah, getting to experience something from a stormtrooper's perspective, that's something we never got before this
Yeah,
film."
true.
Um, and then, of course, Snoke comes in this film, which I have so many thoughts on Snoke that I would love to get into. And we can maybe talk about that more with episode 8 potentially. Another thing, this was one of the negative remarks I had about Force Awakens, was that I think sometimes it felt like it was trying too hard to be funny,
Mm,
and it's just a very different, type of funny from the originals. 'Cause
mhm.
the originals, it kind of felt so natural, especially with Han.
Yeah,
It
sure.
it was like, this scruffy nerf herder funny, whereas this one, it doesn't quite hit the same way when Poe makes
Mhm.
like a side comment.
Mm,
Like, he's
mhm.
talking with Kylo Ren at the very beginning. He's like, "What am I supposed to say? Are you gonna
Yeah,
talk?
yeah.
Am I gonna
Am I
talk?"
gonna talk?
I'm
Right,
like, "This
right.
is the first 2 minutes of the film, and you're already trying to be funny." You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah.
Um, but I also think the movie is more enjoyable not knowing how the next 2 films go.
Mm.
And maybe that maybe that's a negative thing in the grand
Mhm.
scope.
Mhm.
But those were a few of the thoughts that I took away. Oh, and then the last one I was gonna make a note of, and this is kind of akin to the fact that sometimes it feels like they're trying too hard to be funny. I made a note that says the dialogue feels way too on the nose.
Mm.
I think what I meant by that was like, let's say I wish I could think of an example of this off the top of my head, but I think the way you commonly see this manifest in movies is when there's an obvious over explanation of something that they are doing or need to do or trying to
Yeah,
do.
right. Yes, yes, yes.
And so it's like, well, duh, that's what you don't have to like say it.
Mhm.
And a lot of the dialogue in this film, watch this closely because I noticed this when I was watching The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi, it feels like a lot of the dialogue, especially between Luke and Rey, there's pause. In The Force Awakens, there's certain scenes in this film where it's like line, cut to the next person, line, cut to the next person, line. Like the whole thing feels a little bit
Mm.
rushed.
Okay.
And Last Skywalker is actually a little bit, The Rise of Skywalker is actually that way a little bit too, I
Mhm.
thought.
Right.
So I had a lot more thoughts, but at the risk of going too long, I wanna hear what some of your thoughts were on Force Awakens.
So, you know, as I mentioned, I wanted to go into this as, like, kind of fresh and, pretend I had never seen it. How it feels if this was my first Star Wars, how would this feel? You know?
Mhm,
Um, and what to mention to comment on some of the things that you said, like the funny bits. I think just as time goes on, the versions and the way you can be funny is just different now to where things were a little bit not quite as on the nose as you said. There has to be a little bit more kind of purpose towards it. Not purpose, but like, kind of almost exaggerated. It just kind of feels like that's where we are sometimes when
mhm.
we're watching these movies. Like, I think like things like Spider-Man or any Marvel movie or anything like that, that's kind of where we are, and
Yeah.
this was kind of in that era of, so um I still laughed at quite a bit of some of the jokes that were there. Even when even, you kinda mentioned the Poe, scene there. Even when he did that twice with Kylo also. He did also, I think, on the, when he was on his ship, being, interrogated. He also, did it there where he was kinda, like, doing, "I can't hear you with the mask on," and, all that
Mhm,
stuff, and, um, so I think that sets a precedent basically for his character. This is he's kind of the smart mouth. He is, he's later called the fly boy. And he kind of just does what he wants. So it kind of set that tone really early with Poe, which I think I liked. Um, my big thing was by the end of this movie, I was so hyped for everything.
Yes, I
For
remember that feeling
I
too.
remember
Oh,
I was
man.
so hyped for everything. And this is kind of how I felt at the end of this watching it again. Kind of seeing Rey kind of develop in the way that she did. She was this I'm not going to go into the story too much, but yeah, eventually she ends up realizing she has these force powers and is able to manipulate them in ways that she can figure out. She doesn't understand exactly how or why she has all this. Um, Even a little bit timid, a little bit scared sometimes that she, of where she could do it. If you remember in the scene where she is able to pull the lightsaber from, the snow in front of Kylo, she
Mhm.
almost has, like, a scared look, like, she's like, "Whoa, I can't believe I'm doing this." So, props to props to Daisy on the acting there. I enjoyed all the acting very much in this movie. Um, I do remember so in comparison to, like, when I was watching it originally, I do remember thinking, "Wow, this is just like New Hope," or this was a
Yeah.
lot like the Star Wars. This was very comfortable watching this movie. There was definitely a few updates in comparison to other Star Wars movies that we had watched. Um, but I really felt that this was going to go somewhere really great, so
Mhm.
by the end of this, when I was watching it this time, I felt that, like, "Oh, this is gonna be good." You kinda 'cause you have pretty much all the things that you have. You have the hero that has determined, like, "Oh my gosh, I am a special person." You've got the person who was injured at the end of it. You got Finn, who was, pretty brutally hurt in that battle with Kylo. You had no idea exactly what was gonna happen with him. You saw Kylo was down, as well. He's gonna group up with Snoke at the end. Um, yeah, so you still had a lot of potential going on to this movie, and, I was excited for it. Um, and some of the bad things about it, I mean, I still didn't find I mean, I still enjoyed it. Going into this in my, like, list of Star Wars movies, this is probably one of the top ones out of the sequels. I
Mhm.
think this was normally on my, like, the top of the sequels. This movie was it.
For most people, I
So,
think that's the same, I would say.
yeah, so that's kind of where I started everything. Is that where I end them? We'll see.
Okay, so do you wanna wait until after we talk about 8 and 9 to kinda go over our list of all 3? Or would you rather kinda give a feeling of what you thought in regards to? Because I know how I felt at the end
Mhm.
of my rewatch of episode 7 compared to how I felt at the end of my first watch of episode
Okay.
7.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
'Cause I also think it's a little bit of an unfair conversation because as you
Mm,
alluded
mhm,
to, the first time we ever saw episode 7, there was no episode 8 and episode 9.
mhm,
And
mhm.
so all of what we were thinking about was up in the air in regards to, how the rest of the trilogy would turn out. And so, we can kinda go into this rewatch with an open mind and say, we're gonna give this, like, a huge shot and and whatever chance we wanna give it. But, when push comes to shove, we know how things end already at this point in
Right.
time. So, uh, having said that, I would say the film, it definitely holds up, that's for sure.
Mhm.
And I found it just as enjoyable for me
Yeah.
personally as the
Mhm.
first time I watched it. However, obviously, at the conclusion of the movie, I wasn't at the same level of excitement as I was the very first time I saw it.
Mm, mhm. Of course.
Um, right, but all that to say, I didn't find it to be particularly better or worse
Mhm.
on my watch through. One other point I did wanna note that I forgot to bring up earlier because I think it's important for the scope of the trilogy, kind of to tie it back to what we were talking about with the directors earlier. Something that these films really oddly do is that they can't decide who the love interests are gonna be in each
Mm,
movie.
mhm.
Like, in episode 7, it is heavily implied that the main love interest of these films is going to be Rey and Finn. Like, the movie ends and you're like, "Oh, I
Oh,
mean,
this
they're
is
they're
happening. Yeah.
yeah, they're gonna be together. They're gonna be this forced
Yeah.
couple by the end of episode 9," you know what I mean? Um, and then episode 8 gets here and, it's like, Finn and,
Rose
Rose
come in, yeah.
and Rey
Kylo
and
kinda start up,
Kylo
yeah. Mhm.
and, even Poe and his Spice Runner girlfriend in episode 9. But, I mean, that's kinda beside the point. What I'm really trying to say is this is just another emphasis
Yeah.
on the fact that there's a little bit of a lack of direction
Yeah.
in regards to what they wanted to do with the characters and One
Direction, I
Piece.
get it.
Direction.
I get it.
Honestly, I think as Disney, what they're doing now is smart, not to go off track too much, but what they're doing now is smart in having movies that, coming out that don't connect to one another,
Mhm,
because it
mhm.
gives directors a little bit more creative freedom, even though they're still
Mm.
under the umbrella of Disney. Because when you do something like a trilogy and you don't have the same supervision over every movie, you end up with movies like these. Not that they're
Yep.
bad, but they just, they don't go
Yeah.
together in a way that really works.
Right.
So,
Yeah. I mean, for me, I when I first watched it, it was definitely exciting. I enjoyed it. I came out of it. I was happy. Um, and I wasn't necessarily, more happy. I mean, obviously, it's been some time. I know what happens in the movie, so it was about the same for me. So, but all that to say that like I said, this was my top out of the sequel going into this.
yeah, and maybe okay, so maybe real quick before we start talking about episode 8, maybe we could both give our rankings of these films for us personally before our watch through.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, mine is before the watch through would have been 7, 8, 9.
hmm
Well, how about you?
same 789.
Yeah. Which I think is probably the most common series of rankings
hmm
for Star Wars fans, if I had to guess. I don't know that for
Right.
sure, but,
hmm
um, so episode 7, while I think it is, essentially episode 4 redone,
Mm,
it doesn't take a ton of risks, but it is probably the most quintessentially Star Wars movie of the 3. And
right.
for that reason, it got great Rotten Tomatoes scores, both with the critics and with fans, getting 93% on Rotten Tomatoes, which shocked me that it was that high. That's the critic score, and then the fan score, of
hmm
course, being 85%, which is still pretty high.
Yeah. Right.
Um, so all that to say, at the time that this movie came out, this was very hyped, and the results of the film were almost all positive
Yeah.
from at least from in terms of Rotten Tomatoes, I should say.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Did you have any concluding thoughts on episode 7 before we move on to episode 8?
Uh, Not really. I was just like I said, I was equally as happy coming out of that movie first time in comparison to this time.
Yeah. Something Joy and I are trying to focus on with these podcasts is kind of be more concise with our thoughts, and now I'm realizing, like, things that we left out. So if we do leave anything out about these episodes that you like, "Oh, they didn't talk about that in episode 8," or, "They
Mhm.
didn't mention blah, blah, blah in episode 7," feel free to let us know in the YouTube comments. One thing I will put in there real fast before we talk about episode 8, gotta give a shout out to Han, of course.
Of course, yeah.
Big
We
RIP
lost Han.
for yeah. Or did we? We might see him again in episode 9.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yep.
No one's ever really gone.
I, Joey, I need you to know, I tried so hard when I was reviewing these to not just, like, make points of writing notes about, like, "What? Why is that?" Like, "What? Why?" You know?
Yeah, yeah.
And I did really well with it. And then I
I'm
got
happy. I'm proud of you.
the further in I got, I was like,
Yeah,
"What?"
yeah. Come on.
Anyways, yeah. Um, episode 8, The Last Jedi, came out on December 15th, 2017, almost exactly 2 years to the day after The Force Awakens. It is also the longest of these 3 films, coming in at 2 hours and 34 minutes, roughly 13 minutes longer than episode 7, and about 11 minutes longer than episode 9. Um, this is also the tribute film to Carrie Fisher, if I'm not mistaken. I thought it was also pretty fitting, and I didn't remember this until my watch through. The first line of this film is delivered by Billie Lourd, um, Carrie Fisher's daughter, and so I was like, "Oh, that's cool." I didn't notice,
Mhm.
the last time I had seen it. One of the biggest points in this, um, movie, apart from different various shifts that we've sort of already touched on with episode 7, like the love interest thing, for example. But apart from that, right away, initially, I noticed a change in how Snoke and Kylo's relationship is in this
Mhm.
movie. In episode 7, it feels very not reserved, but the way that Snoke is talking to Kylo, it's kind of slow. It's like, "You are my apprentice, like,
Yeah.
go here, do this." And then in episode 8, it's like, "You're worthless. How could you?"
Yeah, right.
It's like this anger shift almost a little bit from Snoke. By the way, played by none other than our favorite Andy Serkis, from the renowned show Andor. Catch it on Disney Plus if you haven't seen it
Hino is Snoke.
yet. Kino is hashtag Kino is Snoke in the
That's right.
comments. Um, but I thought that is definitely a purposeful choice on the part of Ryan Johnson.
Mhm.
How did you feel about the portrayal of Snoke in this movie? Because he is one of the most distinguishable differences right away in this one, for
Mhm.
me at least, compared to Episode 7.
I think I can't go into that without saying this first is, something you mentioned about the first episode is that there was not a ton of risks taken.
Yes,
There was every risk taken in this
yes.
movie.
This is the most
Um,
risk-taking of the 3,
this
I
is
would
the most
say.
yes, this is out of the 3, this one took the most risk. They swing they swing for for a home run. Every single character tried to do this. I don't know if everyone stuck, but I appreciated the opportunities and the shots that we try to get with all of it. Um, and with Snoke, I think that's I think the emergence of Snoke in the first film and kind of where we were with him in this one, and to end up at the end of the film where he is essentially taken down by, by Kylo.
Mhm,
Um, I thought that was a risk because that's not because if you look, if we think episode 7 is like episode 4, then this should line up with episode 5, and it did not. We took down who we thought was the ultimate villain very early on in this trilogy.
mhm.
Um, so I remember when I watched it originally when it happened, I was just like, "Oh, well, I didn't think that was gonna happen quite yet." Only to emerge that, Kylo was gonna kinda stay because the normal track that you would have seen would be he turns on everyone evil, Kylo does, and
Mhm,
then joins Rey, and then then they will fight the universe together on the light side. That was kind of, where you thought this was going, but then it did not. He stayed on the dark side. He stayed, with the Empire. Well, yes. And,
First Order, yeah.
First Order, sorry. Oh
First
my
Order,
gosh, yeah.
Empire,
First
potato,
Order, all bad
potato.
guys. Yeah, all
Yeah.
bad guys. I'm like I said that, I'm like, "That's not right." Stayed with the First Order, and, um, yeah, so that risk, I kind of liked all of that. But going back to Snoke, I think it was interesting because and I remember thinking about this the first time and I thought about it again this time. I'm like, "Well, what was the point of him?" Like
Yeah,
like,
I think a lot of people felt that
you're
way.
like, you had this credible actors, incredible character. I thought was very interesting. Like you said, they ramped him up a little bit here in this episode, so, that was cool. But then to have it all end so quickly, you're just like,
Mhm.
"Oh, well, that was." And a lot of people either thought that was pretty anticlimactic of that particular character arc, maybe. But to, go back to what it did for the rest of the film, for Kylo and everyone else, I thought it was an interesting choice.
Yeah. Yeah, Snoke, to tie it back to what we were talking about earlier with the directors, Snoke is the single most tangible, difference in terms of plot and storytelling that, like, undoubtedly, if J.J. Abrams was directing this film, I don't think Snoke would have died.
Mhm.
Like why introduce him the way you did in Episode 7 only to have him, like, what happened to him in Episode 8? I think it's pretty fair to say that if this 8th episode is directed by J.J. Abrams, that Snoke makes it through. I would guess at least.
Mhm.
Um, and now I feel like to tie it into what Star Wars is sort of going through now with lots of lore related to cloning, in the Bad Batch and in the Mandalorian. I feel like that is in some way going to tie into Snoke because
Mm.
he's a bit of an enigma in the world of Star Wars. Like, where did this guy come from after the Emperor was killed, in quotes?
Mhm.
Like, how did this guy obtain power and how did the First Order rise? Like, some of that has been documented in books in regard to the First Order, but I think particularly with Snoke, we don't have a
Yeah.
ton of info there. So, although I think the throne room scene is throne room scene. Wow, that's a tongue twister. is really cool up until the fight. I feel like the fight is a little bit lackluster,
Mm,
but the dialogue between Snoke and
yeah,
Kylo and Rey, I really enjoy. I would argue you said you would expect this one to mirror Empire. I think Episode 8 actually mirrors Return of the Jedi more
sure,
than
sure, sure.
Empire.
Yeah,
This
yeah, yeah,
scene is, I mean, there is a almost the same angle shot
yeah.
where Rey and Kylo are going up this elevator to the throne
Mhm,
room, in the same way that Luke and Vader go up to the throne room in Return of the Jedi.
mhm.
So I think there's arguably more parallels to Episode 6 than Episode
Yeah,
5 with The Last Jedi.
right.
Um, there's other parts of this film that don't work so well, like the casino stuff, the master
Mm,
codebreaker stuff. What did you feel
mhm,
about that? Because I was really trying. I knew going
mhm,
into this movie that was gonna be the part of it where it was
right,
hard for me to get over some of the
right.
shortcomings of that
Listen,
piece of the plot.
I think we already determined that we are the masters of side quests, Ben, okay?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that if that wasn't a side quest, I don't because, I mean, that ends up kind of being a dead end at the end of it, is
yeah.
they get the master code breaker, he ends up turning on them, and they don't do what they meant to
Well,
do
the
with the
codebreaker they get is not even the
it's not
master
even right, it's
codebreaker.
not even the right, that's right.
Yeah.
It's some other random guy who happened to be in a jail.
Right, which I'm gonna be honest, I forgot that
Yeah,
before
yeah.
this watch through,
Me
or
too, actually
maybe
did
I
too.
didn't even know that was a thing at all. Like,
Yeah.
I always thought in my memory that Benicio del Toro's character was the master
Mhm.
codebreaker,
Mhm.
and then when I watched it through, I was like, "Oh, this is, like, just some
There's
random
some
guy who's
yeah,
good at breaking codes."
right, yeah. How convenient. No, I but like I said, masters of side quest. So I think
Mm.
that's all that was. I actually did enjoy it watching it again because there were a couple of storylines happening at the same time. I always kind of like that because you had everything that was going on with Ray and Luke, which we'll go back to Luke in a second. Um, there
Oh my gosh, we
was
haven't even talked
everything
about Luke in
yeah.
this movie yet.
There's everything with Kylo Kylo and Rey, they're kind of doing the force time, not FaceTime, but force time, with each other. Then we had
Worst
everything what that was going
worst
on.
time. I
Every
like
yeah.
that.
Yeah, that was me and my buddy who came up with that. Then there was the whole thing with, what was happening on the ship with Poe and, Vice Admiral Holdo and, so I kind of liked that, like, kind of that spread out. They were all kind of spread out.
Mhm.
And so you had to kind of copy, you had to follow along with each of them. So the fact that one of them was a side quest, it actually I didn't mind that as much. Um, and also I kind of really did like the casino. I loved, first of all, the music in all of these films.
Yeah.
Just I loved it so much. So I think that's always what makes Star Wars is kind of that music. And I think the casino music in particular, I really did enjoy. Anyway, um, but yeah, to answer your question, yeah, I think maybe they put a little more too much emphasis on that story to end up like kind of going back and like not really having any success out of it. Um, but I think I still, like I said, I still enjoyed it for what it was.
Yeah. And during that storyline, I also think they do a semi decent job of building this relationship between
Yeah, Finn and
Finn
Rose, yeah,
and Rose, only to kind of throw it away in episode 9, but
as yeah,
um that was actually one piece that I in my memory I didn't remember it being good.
hmm
But watching it again, I found it not as difficult as I thought it would.
right.
I
And
thought they did an okay job of building that
I
relationship.
think Rose gets a bad rap in this one too. So the the where she was in the universe, she was, she came up on a planet that was also, essentially destroyed by the First Order. She goes on this planet, which is Canto Bight,
Mhm.
and kind of sees exactly the same thing happening there. So, um, I thought that was a kind of a cool story to kind of bring into uh into this trilogy, but like you said, only be thrown away. Then you don't see her basically at all in the next movie. So I feel like that we needed more of Rose and the Finn Rose kind of relationship was going. But yeah, so as much as I wanted to stay positive, like I wanted this to like either make up your mind. Is it gonna be a Rey Finn thing? Is it gonna be a Rose Finn thing? Is it gonna so, I think we're it just gets muddled up right here.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, the Ray I would say a hot take of mine is that I think the Finn Rose relationship actually works better than the Ray Kylo relationship.
Sure, 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 yeah.
At least I find it way less uncomfortable.
Yeah,
Especially in this
yeah.
movie where there's like that weird scene where his shirt is off and she's like, "Could you please put a shirt on?" He's
Yeah,
like,
that came out of
"No."
nowhere, by the
Yeah.
way.
You're like, "Okay, whatever. This is odd."
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
But we
and,
gotta
and
talk
this
okay, go ahead, sorry.
yeah, we were gonna say the same thing. Were you gonna
Yeah.
talk about Luke?
Yeah,
This
yeah,
takes place,
the big elephant in the room.
yes, this takes place after Ray has met with Luke, offered him his lightsaber. Of course, the movie starts off with him chucking it over the edge of the cliff, and everyone in the audience is like, "What?
"Mhm? Excuse me now?"
Is this Luke Skywalker who just threw his lightsaber into the ocean?" Presumably. Um, I think another reason why fans did not receive this movie well. By the way, this movie got 91% by the critics, and 42% from the fans. By far the largest disparity uh, between any of these three films, um, is mainly because I think people felt like this heroic character that they had
Mhm,
known and grown up with had been um, changed, or the character itself in the film of Luke was not what people thought it should have been, or not in line with their
mhm.
Luke Skywalker.
Right, exactly.
At one point and it's funny because part of the culmination of this film is I think Luke learning um, through the process of training Rey, but also kind of learning from Yoda's Force Ghost too. When he's like, "I've got to burn the books. I've got to burn it all."
And the Jedi religion, yeah.
Yeah, he also refers. I think this is the only time,
Yes.
other than like Han Solo in the original trilogy, when he's like hokey religions and ancient weapons. I think this is the only time a Jedi refers to like
Mhm,
being a Jedi as a religion that I can think of. Maybe I'm wrong, but that stood out to me as noteworthy or notable. I was like, that's interesting
mm,
that he's calling it a Jedi religion. Um, anyways, regardless of that, Yoda, Luke's on his way to burn the books. He's hesitating, and then Yoda like summons lightning or fire from the sky, and it burns the
yeah, right,
tree.
right.
So Yoda is almost like confirming what Luke is. I don't
About to do,
know.
yeah.
Yeah, I think I actually took that way better this watch through than I did on my first watch
Mhm,
through. On
mhm,
my
mhm.
first one, I was like, "How could he burn the books?" You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But I kind of get it. The real theme that I think they're trying to talk about with this um, portion of the movie, like Luke and Ray in their training, and with Yoda as well, is that light and dark are always going to exist. Even if there is no
yeah,
Jedi, even if there is
yeah,
no Sith, there will always be light and dark. I mean, it's the closest thing in the sequel trilogy to um, kind of what Rebels touches on in like the grayness of things and just the force as a whole, and
mhm.
not like this guy good, this guy bad, they fight each other. Like
Yeah,
it didn't expand a ton on that, but it was really delving into the ideas of good and evil in a way that wasn't just very rudimentary, like I would
right,
argue episode 7 and 8,
yeah,
7 and 9 are.
right.
By the
I think
way,
that
you want to hear my hot take?
okay,
This is my biggest hot take of this podcast. Maybe this gives away too much about my list after the films, but my biggest hot take of this podcast is that this was my favorite one to watch of the three.
okay, I got you.
Yeah.
Um, to go back to what you said about, we're us talking about Luke and what we're saying about risks.
Mhm.
Huge risk what they did here, what Ryan did here. Um, the I feel like I'm okay with the character he became, that Luke became.
Mhm.
As long as there's some type of explanation, you
Mhm.
know, it kind there from the end of Return of the Jedi to here. That is a the delta between of what we know, the change between that is like essentially fundamentally a different character, right? Um, so but it doesn't mean that can't happen. It doesn't mean that that's something. Yes, it is our hero, but it doesn't mean that can't happen. So I think the execution of it was bad.
Mhm.
If there was some more explanation of what had happened going into it, maybe if there was like a little mini series before this, I don't know. If there was a way for us to reconcile where he was at the Return of Jedi to here, I think it would have been all right.
Yeah.
Um, and the focus here actually, and I think people don't want to talk about this, is not the character arc of Luke. It's actually Rey. It's actually supposed to be Rey's story here. So if you watch it from this angle, where Rey is struggling to figure out exactly where she belongs in all of this, right? That's kind of where I took this film. Where she even says it as much. Like, I don't know where my place is in all of this. By the way, writing, I thought the writing was pretty good in this one.
Yeah, I would agree.
Um, so I think the fact that if you look at it from Rey's perspective, and I know there are some people that just don't like her character for whatever reason, but if you look at the storyline from there, you can see from film to film her struggling with that. She has realized the powers that she has. Um and she's trying to figure it out the entire time. She's going to somebody who is supposedly the best, and he's not available for it. So now she's going to be like, "Well, where do I turn? I'll turn to somebody who I can go to," which is
Mhm.
Kylo in this sense, right? And I think that's something people don't want to recognize. And
Yeah.
as much as and I think this film actually solidifies that because if you don't have anybody and you've got at least somebody even to talk to, of course you're gonna build a relationship, a bond, whatever it is between Rey and Kylo that starts here.
Mhm.
So I think that's so my hot take is that I think I enjoyed this more than any of the other 3, and I think we're going down the same road, Ben, is that even though maybe not all of the risks hit and were executed properly, I think this is what this trilogy needed. So to the 42%, I don't agree necessarily here. I think it was, and I'm gonna say it here, it was the best of the 3.
I think it okay, I was gonna say not only did I enjoy it the most, I think it's the best movie of the 3.
Yes.
Um, I was gonna say me personally, but I think it's hard to say objectively when it comes to
Yeah, yeah,
these
yeah.
things.
Of course, of course.
But I would say objectively, it's the best of the 3.
Yeah.
I mean, it's far and away better than
I
episode
mean,
9, I
let's I
think.
mean l I mean, let's even talk about, I know Gibbo's like, "Hey, let's talk about how much more we wanted to talk about this in comparison to the last episode, right? Because
Yes.
episode 7 was just like, "Here, fluff, and this is great, whatever." You can get into so many levels into this movie, and
Mhm.
people want to hate on it, I get it, but, like, even here yeah, perfect. With thank you, Gibbo. With Finn here at the end of this, I was like, "Is he really gonna take one for the team?" You know?
Yeah.
I mean, I genuinely when I first watched it, I'm like, because you knew how much hate he had for the First Order, and he would do this. He would do this, and essentially, when Rose takes him out to make sure, it only solidifies that possible relationship even more. So, as much as there was very disconnected between the last episode and this one, I thought this one was the superior one, at least of the two, and then ultimately of the three.
I feel like the low percentage from the fans on this movie, a lot of that was frustration and even anger at the time for,
Mhm,
Luke being killed off.
mhm.
And maybe in a way that was very
Right,
unsatisfying or people were like,
right.
Luke wouldn't die that way."
And
And
here's
it's
the
like,
here's the here's the
I mean,
execution thing I'm talking about.
yeah.
It's like, okay, maybe that could have been done better too, you know?
Yeah,
But
but it's a sacrificial death too,
right, yeah,
I get that it was kinda, like, I guess, lame, but I think it's more important about what the death represents, not necessarily, like, how it happened.
exactly. exactly, and that's again, this is, meant to be Rey's story at the end of this.
Mhm.
That's what it's meant to be. Um, and I've said this in the past, not with you, but with friends in the past, is that the worst thing that they kind of did with this trilogy and I is have Han and Luke and Leia be in it, honestly. I think
Yeah. It
if this was a separate entity, you did
Mhm.
not have expectations of certain characters, I think this would have been a slam dunk, this entire trilogy.
I mean, I definitely agree with you. From a money perspective, I mean, it totally makes sense to have them in the movie.
Mhm.
Um, and even from, like, a fan perspective, because it's you get all these people who were born in the '60s, '70s, '80s, '90s
Yeah, of
who
course.
are like, "Oh my gosh, they're back in this one." Like, this is how you get the old
Mhm.
guard, per se, on board with wanting to go see these films, is putting those characters in it.
Yeah.
However, I would totally agree with you that the inclusion of those characters in the films forces the writers to make the story,
Mhm.
if not around those characters, very
Mhm.
inclusive. Those characters' roles in the film very inclusive in the plot of the film, and
Mhm.
so eh, sometimes it doesn't work fully. And
Yeah,
then you
and
have
I
people like Han Solo who are like, you better write me off in the
yeah,
first film. I'm not
that's
coming
right.
back for the next ones."
Yeah. And I mean, this is probably a pretty good time to move on to the next one
Yeah, yeah.
because of what actually happens in real life with one of
Yes,
these characters, unfortunately.
yes. Um, Sorry, last thing I wanted to say about Last Jedi. I thought the best line in the sequel trilogy came from this movie too.
Oh,
The greatest teacher failure is. It's when Luke is
yes,
talking, or
yes!
when Yoda's
Yeah,
talking
when
to
Yoda's
Luke.
talking about yes, I heard that,
Like, oh, that's
and
so
it's
good.
such a
Like, at
good
no
line.
point in episode 7 or 9 was I like, "Oh, that was a really great line."
Yeah.
I paused and I was like, "I gotta write that down." That
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
that is like quintessentially Yoda and quintessentially Star Wars. But
And sequel. Just kidding.
yeah, yeah. Well, I feel like we could probably talk even more about episode 8, but again, at the risk of running too long, because I think we're already an hour into this pod, um, we'll go ahead and hop on into episode 9, which premiered on December 20th of 2019. Again, nearly almost 2 years to the date, after the release of The Last Jedi. This one is generally regarded as kind of a head scratcher, maybe is a kind way to put it. So of the 3 movies on the rewatch, this was the one I went into thinking, "Okay, like, really, really try to give this movie a chance." Because I will say at the end of episode 8, walking out of the theater, I wasn't incredibly pleased, but at the end of episode 9, I was, like, tangibly sad. Like, I went to the
Sure.
film with my dad and both my brothers, and none of them are, like, massive Star Wars fans, but they like Star Wars, and I remember walking out. I didn't actually stand up for probably 2 or 3 minutes as the credits were rolling, and I remember my dad looking at me and saying, "Well, what'd you think?" And I was like, "I just feel like they ruined Star Wars." And I know we
Yeah,
like
yeah.
joke around about how I felt about episode
Mhm.
how I feel about episode 9 a lot of the times. So, having said that, I was going into this rewatch like I'm going to give this a full chance to like change my mind or adjust my thoughts or feelings on this movie. Um and I got to say, while this movie definitely has the most flaws of the 3 sequel movies, I think the first third to first half of this movie is not that bad.
I agree.
Um, and there's parts in it where I'm like, okay, like expand on that a little bit more, but nothing in the first half of this movie. I'm saying that off the top of my head, I don't recall anything super specifically. Um, the throw off thing with Chewie is a little weird in the beginning too,
Mhm.
but there's really nothing in the first half of this film for me that was glaringly bad, maybe like I remembered it being. Um, and I guess I could get into more of my thoughts on the movie too, especially the second half and the last half hour or so. But what did you feel about episode 9?
So when I first watched the movie, I was actually in San Francisco with some of my buddies, and we went into it originally just saying, we don't know what's going to happen here. We're just going to go along for the ride,
Hmm.
and whatever happens kind of happens here. It's Star Wars. We try to be not overly critical with everything that we watch. So, going into it, that's kind of what I was thinking. At the end of it, okay, yes, it wasn't like the best, but I still walked out like, okay, I enjoyed myself. There were definitely bits and pieces of it
You,
where I'm like,
you had a
I'm
more
not.
positive attitude about it
Yes,
than I did.
yeah. I did not think it was the end of Star Wars. I
I almost cried.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of talked about it over the past year or so, or 2 years probably at this point. How much you love this particular movie. So I
Yeah,
figured that as much. But I mean, for me, like even the first like 15, 20 minutes of it, where I know a lot of people like I talked to didn't like because it was so fast paced and it was kind of quickly going from scene to scene and story to story and where we are to finally kind of come all together and try to slow down. So I kind of like how we got thrown into the first scene with Kylo. The biggest criticism I have for this episode, was they just, like, threw the Emperor in all of this, like,
yeah,
it felt really. I remember because I was at Star Wars Celebration as shown by my shirt, easy flex. That's where they show the actual trailer for it, and actually, Ian McDermott was there when they showed the trailer. So for those who don't remember the trailer, at the very end, you hear the Emperor's laugh. And that's kind of how or
yes.
the yeah, so that's how you know that he has come back,
I remember that reveal. That was pretty epic.
That was pretty incredible, right?
And then
So,
everyone started thinking about it, and they were like,
what
"Wait."
but how? Like, exactly. Like, it's amazing, but you're like, "Wait a minute, this is how many years after he died already and all this?" And, but by throwing the Emperor into it without any and again, this is the same thing where, with Luke and his change, whatever. How are you gonna throw the Emperor, like, in the last episode without any context going into the any of the trilogy, you know? Like, the only thing that we have is Snoke at this point, and then all of a sudden the Emperor pops up, you're just like, "I have no idea where I am in space." Like, I have no where I am in time. So I think that was my biggest criticism, and even going back to what I said earlier about bringing in kind of these quote unquote "legacy players," legacy actors into it. It's like you're like, "Okay, well, we need a home run. Let's just throw the Emperor in it." That's what it felt like to me, you
They'll
know?
accept it.
Yeah, they should be fine, you know? Now was this part of the grand scheme of things from the beginning? I have no idea, but it
I
just
would very much doubt it. I
you
don't
know what I mean?
yeah.
So it felt like, again, they were taking a risk, but to cover their butts, like, "We need to make something crazy happen here. Let's just have the Emperor show up." That's what it felt like to me. Um And to, ultimately have Rey be like a descendant of Palpatine, I was just like, "Okay, I guess." Like, there was a lot of that happening in
Yeah,
this
and they don't go
episode.
into hardly any detail about like, first of all,
Right.
this also makes us accept the fact that Palpatine was, like, getting freaky with somebody and had kids and then, like, killed his
And
kids
yeah,
and
nobody wants that image. I mean, if you wanna talk about yeah, that's scarring for
yeah,
anybody.
yeah. So, it first of all, it forces you to accept the fact that, like, Palpatine, like, had kids with someone.
By the way, happy Mother's Day.
Yeah, happy Mother's Day. I mean, who knows what happened to this, woman
Yeah,
who birthed
yeah.
Palpatine's they don't even make it clear if the
Mhm.
mother is Palpatine's kid or if the father is Palpatine's
Yeah,
kid,
we have no idea.
which I guess in the grand scheme of things, they're like, "Ah, doesn't matter."
Yeah.
But it's
But, I mean,
odd.
the only thing it does, it gives you a reason, quote unquote reason as to why Ray has these powers, which I don't think you necessarily even need. I don't
Right.
think I don't think that's just because somebody has force abilities doesn't mean they have lineage to anybody necessarily of
Right.
importance. There was a lot of like theories saying that she was Obi-Wan's kid or Luke's kid or whatever kind of going into this. It didn't need to be that. So when they dropped that, bomb of like, "Oh, you're Palpatine's kid," I'm like, I mean, I guess, so I was like I said, there was a lot of me saying that, like, okay, I guess so. I'll go along with it." And
Yeah,
and the first watch through and this watch through, it was pretty much the same as far as much, as me just being like, "Okay, that's what happened here."
I would say my this watch through, I was probably more positive on it than
Mhm.
the first time I saw it. Only because the first time I saw it, I had a decent amount of hopes going into the movie, and I think I felt let down by it a lot when I saw it the very first time. I think I was able to appreciate some things about it this time that I wasn't before.
Right.
Um, I just, I guess the fight scene on I guess the
Mhm.
Death Star
That's
remnants, is
sorry,
that
yeah.
what it
Mhm.
is at the
Yeah,
end of the
yeah.
film with the water crashing? I would say that's probably my favorite fight scene of the sequel trilogy.
Oh, yeah.
Um, Now is it choreographed, like, super well? But I like the environment. I think the
Yeah.
dialogue is probably the best of any fight scene. I don't know, the episode 7 one is good too, in my opinion, but this is my personal favorite,
Mhm.
from this movie. Uh, I don't know if I should run through these now, or if you want me to wait to run through these wait till the end of our discussion about episode 9 to run through these, but I can't help but say I have so many questions when the credits roll for this movie.
Yeah.
Like, do you want me to go through them now? I won't answer them all, I'm just gonna
Yeah,
read
yeah.
them to
Yeah,
you.
let's run through them. Yeah, let's hear them.
Okay, first of all, how does Palpatine survive?
Mhm.
Who are the Emperor's kids? Are they
Mhm.
important to the story? Um, why was Luke willing to train Rey, someone who is prone to dark side tendencies, after he has, like, sworn off training people after, like, training Kylo
Ben,
Ren?
yeah. Mhm.
Um, how can Ben talk to Han if Han is not force sensitive?
Mhm.
What did Finn want to tell Rey? This one is a big one for me.
Yes, 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 yes. I think
Like,
yeah.
it's teased, like, 30 minutes into the movie. It's like,
Mhm.
"Rey, I have to tell you something."
Yeah, yeah.
And then at no point in the movie does he tell her anything.
Mhm.
It's presumed that he's force sensitive is why
Right,
he
right,
wanted
right.
to tell her.
Right,
I
yeah.
think that came from an interview with JJ maybe after the fact, but, there's hyperspace skipping apparently now.
Mhm.
The Knights of Ren are really just, like, a
A boy
bunch of
band?
pushovers, yeah. Where did this massive fleet of Sith ships come from that
Mhm.
has been secretly been constructed in the middle of nowhere? And apparently, they all have Death Stars attached to each ship. And actually, we don't even know that for sure
Right.
because the way that it's explained in the movie that each ship has a Death Star, or not a Death Star, like has a
The
Death
star,
Star
like
laser, is that they see one ship with it, and Poe goes. I feel bad for Oscar Isaac. Poe's character always gets the lines that are like the really stupid lines.
yeah,
In
yeah.
this movie, I mean, in this movie, um, he has the Palpatine has returned line where he's like,
Yeah.
"Palpatine is returned," and
Yeah,
they're all
right.
like, trying to
Yeah,
make it
yeah.
dramatic. He
And
also
that's a
has the
meme
line.
everywhere. That's great.
Yes, yeah. He also has the line where he says, "Well, if that ship has it, they must
Yeah,
all
yeah.
have it." And then they just all accept the fact that every ship has a Death Star laser. And it's like,
Mhm.
what?
Yeah, yeah,
How
right.
did that happen? When Lando comes out of nowhere to save the day in this in the at the end of episode 9, where did these ships come from?
Mhm.
There's thousands of ships, and Lando was gone for what, 2 hours?
Right.
Like, where did all these people come from? Are these just, like, people across the galaxy?
Mhm.
Ah, it's just I don't know. Oh, the other big one that really bothers me is when they find the dagger, they go to the planet, they just happen to be standing on the exact spot they need to be standing on, and she pulls out the thing, she's like,
Oh, I found it.
"And oh, it
Yeah.
works," It's like, "Are you
Right.
kidding me?"
Yeah. By the way, we experienced that same thing in Jedi Survivor the other day where we were just trying to figure things out. It took us an hour. I mean, I
Yeah.
know you have force powers, but come on,
Yeah,
work for a
I
little
just
bit.
I have so many. I
Yeah,
probably am leaving some out too, but
yeah.
there's so many questions. The second half
See,
I feel like the second half of this movie
mhm.
is where all the questions really
And
start.
I wonder if we were to go back to the prequels or even the original trilogy, if we would have a list. I don't know if I'm not saying it would be
Maybe.
it may not be as egregious as this or as intense as this one, but we may have bits and pieces where we would pull out things too. I think the sequel trilogy in itself just gives a bad vibe, not a bad vibe, but like it's not the favorite of a lot of a good portion of people. I wouldn't even say a lot, a good portion of people. There are people that I'm sure love the sequel trilogy. It's their Star Wars. Um, but I'm sure that you can do that with any of the trilogies, where there's
Mhm.
gonna be a list of questions like, "Wait, midichlorians?" Like, you know what I mean? So,
Right,
uh,
yeah.
you know, so there's always gonna be people that question these things. So, um, I mean, to wrap it all up, I think that the out of the 3, this one was it kind of it stayed at the bottom there for me, but I think for me, I think 8 7 and 8 switched. I think I like Last Jedi a little bit more, than I did Force Awakens because of the risks, because of, the potential actually going out of it was actually better. I think going back to JJ was probably not the play for this, for episode 9. If they could have gone to another one, if they stuck with Colin, if they went to another director, I don't know, but, um, as much as, like, I did enjoy it going into when I watched it the first time, I mean, I still had my giggles and laughs here and there in this movie. But, as a whole, there were just some very cringy moments. I'm like, "Oh, what are you doing? Why is" and I know there are people that, like, absolutely love the Rey and Kylo thing. I was just like, "Okay, this is here at the end of the movie, I suppose," So, like, it just seemed like I understand for me, for them, it didn't seem like it needed to end that way, you know? It didn't need to end with the kiss for me, for instance.
Right, I think that it feels so forced.
Yeah, yeah. I think that was I think the saving of lives or whatever it had to be could have just kinda be it, you know?
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, I thought them teaming up on the Emperor, I thought that was kinda cool, and, so
Yeah.
there were moments, there were moments.
The Emperor has
But
his, Indiana Jones and
right.
Holy Grail death.
Yeah, yeah. But if I'll tell you what, if Marvel Endgame didn't come out before this, I would have enjoyed this ending better because it was almost a shot for shot thing of, I am I am inevitable, and she's like, I am the Jedi, and like, and that's how she defeats the Emperor, Thanos, whatever, what have you. It's parallel. It was one for one. So I think if Endgame didn't come out before it, and it was the same thing, like I am all the Jedi, and like and it had the entire, like, fleet of every single ship come in, just like all the Avengers and all of the every mutant and all that, so it was just like, I feel like I've seen this movie because I have. Disney, I've seen it.
You know what my favorite part of that battle was at the end?
Mm,
Was, getting to see, or getting to watch it with subtitles on,
mhm.
because the only other time I'd seen it was in theaters, and so I was like, "Who's
Oh,
talking right now?"
all of the voices when it's
Yeah,
yeah,
and so
yeah.
you get to actually see the person.
Yes.
Like, I didn't know Adi Gallia was even in there,
Yep.
or
Mhm.
Ayla Sakura, I didn't know she was in there.
Sakura was there.
There's
Obviously,
a
Ahsoka
couple,
was in there.
yeah, yeah.
Kanan was in there.
Kanan, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan,
Yeah.
Anakin. I mean, there's probably a Mace. There's probably, like, a dozen of them, I wanna
Yeah,
say, that
right.
all have lines in there.
Yeah.
So that was cool to get to watch that part with subtitles,
Yeah.
but, um, not to move on from the episode 9 stuff, did you have anything else in regards to the whole episode 9? Because I had 2 very short, quick questions
Yeah.
related to the
No,
episode.
no, I think that's it. I mean, Gibbo brought up Finn here real quick. I think they did Finn dirty, just kind of overall. I've mentioned
Yeah,
this in the
I agree.
past. He came out swinging in the trailer. He had a lightsaber in. You thought he was going to be the one. He wasn't, which is fine. But they kind of pushed him to the side quite a bit. I think they could have used him a lot better. They could have used Poe a lot better as Oscar Isaac. Um, so I think they missed there. They definitely missed there with the arc that could have been with John Boyega and Oscar Isaac and everyone. So
Yeah.
that's probably my last point.
I want to ask you two really quick questions, and then we'll probably have to start making our way out of here for this episode. How do you feel about the prophecy of the chosen one after watching episode 9? And number two, where's Grogu right now?
Wow, these are really hard. Um,
The second one's kind of a joke question, but if you have
yeah,
a
yeah,
theory,
yeah. Grogu was on Pasana partying with everybody. I think that's where he was.
is a Canto Bite.
He was in Canto Bight, yeah. He was actually in Canto Bight, yeah. As far as the prophecy, I mean,
Do you think Anakin is the chosen one?
right.
Would you say yeah? Because I would still say yes.
I mean, probably, yeah. I mean, probably, yeah. Out of what we've seen, the one to bring balance to the forest, right? Isn't that the prophecy, right?
But do you think the Emperor coming back negates Anakin bringing balance to the Force and therefore being the chosen one? Because I think the first time I watched
Right.
episode 9, that's how I felt.
I see, I see.
And then I came around to the idea that, like, I think Anakin being the chosen one and balancing the Force
Mhm.
and
I think
also
that
just
still holds.
yeah, I think it does too.
Yeah, I think that still holds up. I mean, he balanced it then. I mean, that's not gonna be a permanent thing. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure, yeah.
I just don't think that's a permanent thing. I think to that point, if there just needs to be another prophecy, and that's how Disney's gonna make more money. And
Oh my gosh,
speak
we've unearthed another prophecy from the
yeah,
Jedi Temple.
and speaking of, more money from Disney movies, we'll
Yeah, we've
probably
got
yeah,
some new Disney films coming in the near future. Of course, the one that we were going to particularly kind of mention and focus on as we wrap up here is the Ray film, and I feel like they can only go up from here. Not in a
yeah.
bad way, not to like
No.
demean any of the sequel stuff,
Mhm.
because I think Ray's character. I actually don't mind Ray's character as much as most people.
Yes.
I'm not a fan of like the Ray Kylo stuff, but yeah, yeah, Joey's repping right now. I need to get some sequel merch. I don't even know
Yeah,
if I
yeah.
have sequel
Yeah.
merch, but um oh, also I'm looking at my notes. One thing I forgot to mention with episode 9, shout out to Chewie for finally getting his medal.
Yeah, there you go. Nice.
Um
Yeah, he got it. He got
he
it.
got it. But with the Ray film coming out probably in 2025, hopefully, maybe even
Maybe.
later. Um, I think the goal here is to do justice to the character of Ray.
Mhm.
I just hope that it doesn't go in a really weird direction.
Right, right, right.
And speaking of Grogu, I feel like there's a decent chance we get him in this film
That'd be
potentially.
interesting, yeah, yeah.
I don't know. What do you think about the prospect of the Ray movie? Or maybe if you have an idea of what direction they're gonna do with the
Mhm.
character of Ray?
I think I mean, one, they kinda wanna milk this. I
Yeah.
have a feeling,
What
that
is their
there's the
goal with this movie? That's what I want to
right,
know.
right, yeah, so I think and I don't know if it is 'cause I mean, one, I'm happy that Daisy Ridley has agreed on to do this. That's incredible. Because obviously you can't do this without her. Um, but yeah, what is their goal? What are what story are you trying to tell here? Because you're not gonna have a trilogy. This is a kind of a one movie standalone movie, right? That's kind of
I think
what it
that's
sounds
great,
like,
personally.
which is perfect. But as we've said in the past, we're getting used to these TV series where you have 6, 8, 10 episodes to fully develop the story that you're trying to get. With this one, you have 3 hours, you know? Um,
If that.
now we have we know who Rey is, so there's no need for character development necessarily. But I'm interested in what the story is because I mean, at this point, I think the only thing we know about it is he's rebuilding the Jedi Order, maybe, or something along those lines.
Mhm.
Will a Finn be there? Will people that we've seen in the sequel trilogy have some type of role in it? I mean, I don't know. I don't think we've had any announcements of anyone else other than her.
I thought it was confirmed that John Boyega wouldn't be involved just because of the sour taste that Star Wars has
Hmm.
kind of left in his mouth.
And
But
that's
I
possible.
I
Yeah.
think I feel like I read that somewhere. Anyways,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of details about it.
Right. Yeah. So I think I'm more wait. I'm kind of cautiously optimistic to see where they're gonna go with this. Because like you said, there isn't really you can't really go down from where they ended off. Um,
You know how they should open the movie? Pans to Rey. She's reading a Jedi text. "Oh my gosh. I can't believe they were all lying to me about being a Palpatine.
yeah,
Who is
right.
this Obi-Wan guy who's my father?"
Yeah. Rise of Kenobi.
Rise of Kenobi.
Yeah. And I think that, I don't know, I just want Poe to come back and say, "Somehow Kylo has returned."
Yeah.
And then she'll have the heart's eyes and come out. But, no,
The
I
Force resurrected him.
I'm 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 here for it. I like Daisy Ridley. I think it's gonna be a fun movie. I forget who's directing it. Um, but
Yeah, I forget her name as well. I
yeah,
can look it up while
I
you're,
think she was the one that did Miss Marvel, if
yes,
I'm
that's
not
right.
mistaken, right? Which I enjoyed that series, so I think, it's gonna be, I don't know. I'm not I wanna know more about the story.
Charmin Obaid-Chinoy.
There you go. So I'll be excited in 2025, I'll be there. I'll be in the theaters, I'll be watching it, so Um, as far as it I don't think it's gonna try to fix anything from the
And
sequel
I hope
trilogy,
that's
I
not
hope
the
not.
approach they take. I
Right,
want
yeah.
them to not take the approach of, "Let's try to fix things." I want them to just, like, expand and make the
Yes.
character of Rey as interesting as she can be, you know?
Yeah, same.
I think there is promise to it,
Yes.
but there is also, like, that looming hint that it potentially could do
Yes.
harm.
Yes.
But I think it's more likely that people will have a positive experience with that movie. I would think. That
Mhm.
remains to be seen, though, and I guess
Yeah.
we'll find out in 84 years whenever we get that film.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a long one. We had planned for this to be what, like a 45-minute
45-minute,
podcast?
yeah.
Yeah, and we're approaching an hour and a half, so, if you're still
We did it!
listening to this podcast, we appreciate you, and thanks for listening to, our review and synopsis and covering of the sequels. In all honesty, we could probably talk about each of these movies for like an hour if we really wanted to. So it's tough to condense each one to maybe roughly 20 or 30 minutes. But um, yeah, we appreciate you so much for listening. Joey, any last thoughts on the sequels? Just to review, by the way, Joey and I, prior to our rewatch, both would have ranked it 7, 8, 9, and actually both after rewatching it would now rank it 8, 7, 9.
Correct.
So
Correct.
there you go. Let us know down in the comments of the Hoth Hangout YouTube channel what your rankings are for the Star Wars sequels. Any overarching or last thoughts on the sequels before
I think
we
I
call
think
it?
everybody needs to rewatch them. Give them another chance.
Yeah, especially the people who are like kind of sequels haters, because I will be the first one to like raise my hand and say I'm an episode 9 hater. But I don't know if I am anymore. Uh, I'm not an episode 9 lover, but I'm not
Not a
an
hater,
episode
though.
9 hater.
Baby steps, Ben, baby steps.
Baby steps in the right direction, everybody. Well, yeah, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Hoth Hangout podcast. I think this was number 33, according to producer Gibbo. Also, shout out to producer Gibbo for this episode. I think this
Yes.
was the most images ever gathered and placed into the video version of the podcast. So, I always want to give a special shout out to Gibbo for all the hard work he does behind the scenes. We have a fun podcast episode planned for next week as well. It is actually the anniversary of the release of New Hope. I believe it would be, what did we say, like 46
6?
years? Yeah,
46 years, yeah.
46 year anniversary of A New Hope next week. So we're going to be kind of going to the other end of the spectrum from the sequels and talking about what started it all.
Mm.
A New Hope. We're going to be diving into during next week's episode of the Hoth Hangout podcast. Really looking forward to that one. We might even have to bring some blue milk along with us and drink it during the
Oh,
podcast. Who knows?
I like that.
Who knows? If you're not yet subscribed to the Hoth Hangout podcast on YouTube, we would very much appreciate you hitting that subscribe button over there. I think we're approaching about 125-ish, almost there to that point, subs. So thank you again for the continued support on YouTube as well as on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to us in audio format. We're available over there. And of course, you can check us out on all socials at Hoth Hangout. That includes Twitter, TikTok, and the newly created Hoth Hangout Instagram. So if you're interested in following us there, that's where you can find us. This has been a fun one, a long one, but a fantastic one. Joey, do you have any last closing thoughts?
Somehow, Palpatine has returned. If we hear that again, I'm going to be upset, though.
The Rey movie opens up. He's back. Palpatine's back again. Well, you heard it. Somehow, Palpatine has returned. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Hoth Hangout podcast. We appreciate each and every single one of you so very much. And may the Force be with you.